It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy. Back from Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew version 1.0 deck lists of the commander in front of us in my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby, it's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, as well as I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're getting towards rounding out week 2 of Final Fantasy content, and wanted to take one that definitely caught my eye, and I think is going to catch a lot of other people's eyes as well, and that's Sin Spira's Punishment. A 7-mana Sultai 7/7 Leviathan avatar with flying. It says whenever Sin enters or attacks, we're going to exile a permanent card from our graveyard at random, then create a tap token that's a copy of that card. If that exile card's a land, we do this again. I think this is a really interesting ability, and I think it can pay off a lot of different things. I think it's easy just to look at Sin and say this is going to be a Landfall deck, which I think it is primarily. But I think the other thing that's really cool about this idea is you want to get cards in your graveyard in order to be able to use Sin's ability. So this is kind of a self-mill deck, as well as it's a Graveyard Matters deck because you care about things being in your graveyard and you can care about things entering your graveyard, right? Like with the self-mill stuff. We're going to play a little bit of Tokens Matter stuff, you know, doubling up our tokens or things like Doubling Season and abilities like that. But I'm intrigued to see what we can do to kind of make this crockpot soup of value together to make the deck work and function the way we want. I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in checking all our videos just a teeny bit early, check out that link down below. All right. There's a couple ways we can look at Sin. And I think, to me, I think the kind of the most obvious ones when you have a commander with an ETB ability is things like Blink. I think Deadeye Navigator is one of the better options to do that, recurribly, right, multiple times, right? And worst case scenario, if Deadeye Navigator hits the graveyard, you could potentially hit it with Sin to make a copy of it to bring it back. Spark Double just flat makes a copy of Sin, and it's just not legendary and gets a +1/+1 counter on it. Having 2 of them per turn seems pretty good. And then we have something like Doppelgang. Doppelgang's an odd spell, triple X and Simic, to make X token copies of X target permanents. It's a very weird ability, but basically what it's going to turn out to be is pick all the great things on your board you want to make a copy of and make, you know, a ton of copies of them. It doesn't have to be your things either. It could be your opponent's things too. Doppelgang's such a fun card, and I think at a minimum you hopefully make a copy or 2 of Sin, but at maximum you just pick a bunch of things like lands and other things, just make a ton of copies, and just trigger all your abilities at once for a bunch of fun. But I think that leads us into probably one of the easiest things we can do in the deck, which is Landfall, right? Sin cares about lands coming in, so let's care about Landfall. We have things like AC that can draw us cards whenever lands come in. Avenger of Zendikar makes all those plants when it comes in and grows them every time a land comes in, becoming a nice threat for us. Iridescent Vine Lasher says whenever a land comes in, it deals damage to a target opponent. And we can offspring it to have it deal 2 damage to target opponent whenever a land comes in, or we can split them how we want. Of course, not as good as a damage to each opponent, but I think it's still useful at the right times. Maybe we can machine gun a particular opponent down, or start taking the right opponents down at the right time. Lotus Cobra gets us a mana of any color whenever a land comes in. Mossborn Hydra is going to be one of our creatures that can grow. Comes in with a counter on it, and you double the number of counters on it every time a land comes in. The thing I think is really interesting about Sin's ability is that it does happen on attack as well. Meaning if Sin attacks with, you know, Mossborn Hydra and you hit a land, well, the Mossborn could double in combat, right? And become an even harder threat for our opponents to deal with. Ob Nixilis says whenever a land comes in, we can have target player lose 3 life. If we do, we put 3 counters on Ob Nixilis, so we can start really doling out some damage with Ob. Tediova, just like AC, is going to draw us a card. We also just get a life as well. Rampaging Baloth makes us a 4/4 beast. Tireless Provisioner gives us our choice of a food or a treasure token. And it's important for these landfall triggers that make tokens, because we have other abilities in the deck that care about tokens, so we're going to kind of be hopefully buffing up all these abilities at the same time with what we have there. Yurok is a very interesting creature, and I think fits great here in a role to help us out. If a permanent entering the battlefield would cause a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, it goes off additional time. Again, top tier for Landfall, but also Sin would actually go off twice with Yurok out, which is interesting. And then we're playing some Landfall enchantments, Retreat to Hagra and Retreat to Kazandu. Both let you pick one or the other whenever a land comes in. Hagra is probably better known for its bottom ability, having each opponent lose a life when we gain a life. And then Kazandu can help grow our creatures, putting counters on creatures whenever lands come in. We're going to bolster that up with the new Ride the Shapoof and Roaring Earth. Again, these enchantments that put counters on creatures whenever land comes in. I think we still want to make our creatures more of a threat, and these are easy ways to do it. And then Zendarkar's Royal can, make that elemental token whenever a land comes in. Well, all right, there's the landfall side, but how do we get a bunch of things in our graveyard for Sin to use? Well, again, there's a lot of ways to approach this. You have things like Skull Prophet, which you can just tap to mill 2 cards. Hermit Druid's got a really fun ability to reveal cards from the top to hit a basic land and put that card in our hand and put the rest into our graveyard. Doom Whisperer just lets us surveil 2, so we can kind of look at the top and try to better sculpt what goes into our graveyard while also knowing what's going to go in our hand. It's also a really nice target for those Pulse and Pulse counters, being a 6/6 with Flying and Trample. Summon Titan comes in, mills 5, returns all land from our graveyard back to the battlefield tapped, and they can give a creature a big buff for the number of lands we control. I think Titan's a really interesting card, and I'm intrigued to see if self-milled decks like Taval next to it or other decks really get to utilize it for what it brings to the table. I think Taval's another great piece alongside your Rock for our deck, since we're going to have cards leaving our graveyard with Sin's ability. Taval's going to let us make those zombie druids, as well as zombies. Taval's also going to have cards hit the graveyard and lands come back out, so it's going to trigger off its own ability. But I think it's a nice backup here that's going to help Sin kind of accomplish what we want to do. Buried Alive lets us put 3 creatures of our choice into our yard, which is really useful for Sin because then we have a big chance of hitting them, right, and making copies of them. Life of the Loam as a dredge ability, so if it's in our graveyard, we can actually put it back to our hand instead of drawing a card and mill 3 cards. And Life from the Loam lets us get lands back from our graveyard. Note that Life from the Loam does not say you have to get one. You can return up to 3, meaning you can actually choose 0 to put Life from the Loam back in the yard to keep the dredge train going. Grisly Salvage lets us look at the top 5, put a creature or land from among them into your hand, and put the rest into our graveyard. So we can just keep filling up our yard with stuff to get potentially targeted by Sin. Head Shredder might seem odd because it has an ability that says whenever one or more lands are put into our graveyard from our library, we get to put them on the battlefield tapped. But I think overall it's just going to do nothing but help us out because we have a big chance on some of these big mill stuff to get multiple lands back, get more landfall triggers. And I think there's still plenty of other things in the deck that Sin would want to copy. It doesn't have to just be lands. Perpetual Timepiece taps to mill 2, and you can pay it. You can exile it to shuffle a bunch of things back in if your graveyard gets a little bit too big. And then Ripples on Death and Stillness in Motion both mill us 3 cards each turn. Ripples on Death adds the kind of relief valve that if we mill something in those 3 cards we really want, we could pay a mana and 3 life to get it back to our hand. Whereas Stillness in Motion says if our library has no cards in it, we can exile this and put 5 cards from our graveyard back on top of our library in any order. So we can kind of establish our library with a couple cards in it. I think I like Ripples a little bit more, but I think both of these are going to be key pieces to continue to fill up our graveyard so that Sin has lots of interesting targets. We also want to pay off the graveyard. And again, there's a lot of ways to do it. Things like Colossal Grave Reaver that just came out in those Tarkir decks. Whenever it enters or attacks, you're going to mill 3, and then whenever a creature card's put into our graveyard from our library, we get to put one of them back, which is interesting. Lets us potentially get the right things back at the right time. Muldrotha, right, lets us cast things from our graveyard. Ren in 7 has a really interesting set of abilities. So when it's +1, we get to reveal the top 4, put all lands into our hand and the rest into the graveyard. The 0 can put lands from our hand onto the battlefield tab, which can lead to a bunch of landfall triggers at once. The -3 gives you a nice big tree folk that's going to grow for all of our lands. And then if you get it up to the -8, you can just bring all permanents from your graveyard back to your hand and get no maximum hand size. So Ren in 7 is just really interesting. Has a lot of abilities we care about, especially if we want to focus more in on that landfall. 6 is going to let us play non-land permanents from our graveyard by just pitching a land in response, as well as its other costs. Again, perfect because Sin wants to get those lands back from the graveyard. And then you have things like Insidious Roots, letting all these hopefully these landfall tokens that we make and all these other things tap for mana. And whenever a creature leaves our graveyard, we get to make a plant, put a counter on each plant we control. This synergizes a little bit with Avenger of Zendikar as well. And then Taval's Judgment, whenever one of our cards leave our graveyard, we get to choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. Note that when Sin exiles that card from our graveyard, that's going to count for this and for Taval, right? So they're going to be able to trigger and get us that value, right, every time it happens and help us build up a board state. We're going to round this kind of value train off with things that care about tokens being made, specifically things like Adrix and Double and Parallel. These are all things that just double the amount of tokens that we made under our control. Again, great for Sin's ability, great for our Landfall abilities, great for so much of our deck. Doubling Season actually adds the bonus of also doubling the amount of counters we would put on a permanent we control. So again, that'll help with some of these Landfall things that put counters on things whenever lands come in. But again, the notable thing about all three of these, they are permanents, which means Sin can actually exile them from our graveyard and make a copy of them too. So it's important to note that we're trying to pick things that can also be hit with Sin's ability so that we don't just lose them if they hit the yard. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my version 1.0 shot at Sin, and I think going into testing, I'd really want to see, do I have enough self-mill? Things like Hedron Crab could make a ton of sense, allowing you to mill yourself or mill other players, depending on what you need whenever the landfall goes off. You have big money pieces like Overlord or the Baelmerk that can help you bring creatures from your graveyard back to your hand if you don't necessarily want to wait to hit them with Sin. So kind of an interesting thing, right? We could also play Overlord of the Hauntwoods to make those everything land tokens, right, for more landfall triggers, so that's definitely an option. And then the only lands I didn't consider adding, because I would probably want to because of our budget, is the 3 fetch lands, or more of them, depending on how you feel about fetch lands in your decks. At minimum, it would be 3. Each of them are about $15 a piece, but they sack to a land of either of the types, put it in the battlefield, and then you shuffle, and then Sin could get them back out of the graveyard, right, and have you be able to fetch again. So they're just interesting adds that could get you more searches, more landfall triggers a turn as you set up your board for value. But let's do what we love to do on this channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find Magical Christmas Land. It's not to show off all our best plays, but it's just to get in some game scenarios and see what would we keep and what are we looking for. This is kind of an interesting one. Looking at a 4-lander with Lotus Field. Lotus Field's a land that comes in tapped, and you sack 2 lands when it comes in, but it taps for 3 mana. So it's kind of an interesting way to start getting up to that 7 mana for Sin. We see an offer you can't refuse, so a little bit of interaction. We see Eternal Witness, a way to get something back from our graveyard, and then Colossal Gravereaver up on the top end as well. So we've got some interesting things. Turn 1, we see Maestro's Theater. When it comes in, we can sack it. When we do, we go to go get an island, swamp, or mountain. Again, in our deck, we're only going to be able to get an island or a swamp. I don't mind starting with something like this, only because then that's a target for Sin later, right? So we kind of know we're already kind of getting some value in the graveyard. There's the Terramorphic Expanse. Again, same thing as this. If you get a copy of it, you crack it, right, and go get another land. So I think I'll do exactly that. Go get an island. So again, we're just kind of ramping our way up. We're missing a lot of our low-end plays, but I think that's okay. That doesn't look too bad there, getting to get down the Arcane Signet. We're holding up the offer if, in case something goes really wrong. Well, all right, turn 4, we see Doubling Season. That's not too bad. The question is, do we do something like Lotus Field? Sack 2 lands and put us at 3, 4, 5, 6 would put us at... would put us at Sin next turn, right? Which I think is important. If I tap these 2 for mana, right, and then I play the Lotus Field, I'm not saying I sack those, maybe I sack these 2. Then I should still be able to play the Doubling Season and the Lotus Field this turn. Now, Doubling Season is going to allow us to, get some more value from Sin whenever it gets out, and I think it's going to get out this next turn. You play the Fabled Passage, crack it. It goes and gets a basic land of our choice. Remember, if we have 4 more lands, it comes in untapped, which it is here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is the perfect amount for Sin. Now, if I dump Sin in right now, I have all lands in my graveyard, meaning that Sin's just going to get them all back, if that's what I want to do. Now, remember that not only will it get them all back, but Doubling Season will double all of them. So it kind of makes me wonder if we're better off trying to go for Sin next turn and try to get something like, Mossborn Hydra down. Right, and start to get some value there. We could also get the Eternal Witness back and, get one of our lands back if we want to replay this turn, or play next turn to get that party started. if we want to, but I don't know if that makes the most sense. But my thought with the Mossborn Hydra is at least get something so that when Sin enters and gets all the lands back out of our graveyard, that we're gaining, we're profiting from it. We're not just leaving mana on the table. We can leave some mana up, make our opponents think that maybe we have some interactions, right? But I think we actually can play Eternal Witness and still have a mana open for an offer you can't refuse. I think to farm the landfall triggers, I think it makes the most sense to get one of our lands that fetch back, so we can get multiple drops right next turn. So as we come into this turn, again, I think we get the Fabled Passage. It doubles its counter. Crack the Fabled Passage. Again, it doesn't really particularly matter. The point here is now we've doubled twice. Now we play Sin, right? And we're going to get everything back. But the way this is going to work is that, we're not just getting one of these, we're getting two, right? So for these four, they're just going to make the tokens right away. For this Maestro's Theater, it's going to make 2 copies, but these copies are immediately going to come in and sacrifice themselves. So we're going to immediately already go digging, but that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So that's a very infinitely large Mossborn Hydra if nobody has any response. Because remember, I just realized with doubling Season Out, we're actually doubling the number of tokens that's going on this Mossborn Hydra. So arbitrarily, this Mossborn Hydra is going to be very large. It really doesn't matter. I mean, either somebody has somebody's not going to have a block for it because it has trample. So somebody's probably very dead to the Mossborn Hydra this turn. Then, right, we untap on our next turn. We've got all this mana, right, from these tokens. And now, we can get something like the Grave Reaver in. Again, Hydra can really risk knocking somebody else out. And we're holding up that offer to try to, stop some removal for it. But again, I don't think we really mind because we're in good shape. Let's say we go for the Reaver 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It mills 3 when it comes in. And remember, we get a creature from among them. We get the Druid, and now we don't have a permanent in our graveyard, so Sin wouldn't get one on attack, but I think that's okay. Again, the point is, this really became a Mossborn Hydra game plan. We could play the Ripples of Undeath to kind of get that set up for next turn. But truthfully, this was a Mossborn game that we really set up. And now, next turn we can crack the Hermit Druid, probably go get a creature of our choice out of the things that got milled, and I think we're just looking to be in great shape that game. Hopefully, and if somebody takes out the Mossborn Hydra, well, then that's great for Sin, because right now it's the only permanent in our graveyard, so we're pretty much guaranteed to get it back, right? So we weren't looking too bad there. I think it's unrealistic to expect that we're always going to have Mossborn Hydra in that situation, but when we do, I think we valued the right thing, right? Setting it up and getting the most value from it. Here we're keeping a 5-lander with Your Rock and Stillness in Motion. So there's our mill, there's our double ETB. We've got a land that cares about lands coming in to give us tokens. We got Stillness in Motion to start us doing self-mill. I like this. We can get a land or 2 in tapped here to start. We don't necessarily need to get the Stillness Motion going right away. My thought is do that and get the Stillness down. It goes off at the start of our upkeep, so we're going to mill 3. And look, all 3 of those were permanent, so we've got nice targets for Sin whenever Sin comes down. I could do the Outlook here if I want to, but I think we're just going to put the land down and keep going. Start turn, we mill 3. Again, Boldroth is not a bad thing to get back. Doppelgang's a card that's going to be really fun on a future turn to get a bunch of value. We'll get your rock in. Just do that. And kind of set up a future turn here. Sorry, no, that would have been milled 1, 2, 3. And so we have a chance once we hit 7 with Filter to get it doubled up with your rock. Let's take a quick look at our graveyard. Permanent, spell, permanent, spell, permanent. So 7 out of our 9 cards are permanents. We got lots of fodder there ready to go for Sin. Right now we're 2 mana off Doppelgang being really effective. I guess we could have gone for the Outlook instead of the Forest, but I think either way we're just 1 turn away from having something really fun. So we'll mill the 3 off Stillness in Motion. Play our land in. I think we'll just go for Sin. Now, in a real life game, you would take all the permanents out of your grave, then shuffle up, have one of your opponents pick one. But here we'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is my count. So we'll start up top being 1, down at the bottom being 10. And I'm just going to go ahead and roll a, it makes sense to roll a 12-sided die. Roll a 9. So that's going to be Zendikar's Royal. So we're going to exile the Royal and make a copy of it. Note that Sin's ability is going to go off twice because of your rocks. We're going to do this again. I'll just do a 12-sided die again. If we hit above a 9, we'll just reroll. All right, a 6. We see Summon Titan. So we get a copy of Summon Titan. Remember, these come in with... we just get a tap token. So they can go back to the graveyard, but remember, we exiled the original card. So the token, the token's cool, it stays around. But for something like Titan, right, it's going to go away, right, because it's a saga. And that's actually going to mill me 5 twice. So we're really loading up our graveyard for a good time. Sin can't attack this turn, but that's a-okay. Move to our next turn, Stillness in Motion mills us 3 more. We're really loading up our graveyard. 3, 6, 8. Sorry, that swamp would have given me 2 zombies, right, from the Field of the Dead. And then that island will, because we have enough tokens. And then I think we would have gotten, we'll get the elemental there off of, the elementals there off of the Royal. So now with 8 mana, we've got a couple choices. We can go for something like Doppelgang. We can get 2 things twice if we want to. We can make copies of something like, like that. Or we could just get something like Avenger of Zendikar down, and we're going to be in really good shape. Titan goes off now, returning all land cards from our graveyard back to the battlefield. This is going to be brutal. So this is a ton of zombies. This is a ton of elementals, and it's just all going to be doubled. So truthfully, unless our opponents have a really good board wipe, this is going to be, right, just brutality. We've got how many lands coming in? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lands coming in. Unfortunately, Lotus Field does go off twice. We do have to actually sacrifice 4 lands, which is kind of a bummer, but that is what it is. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 triggers. So we're making 16 zombies, 16 elementals. So we're just in killer shape on land. They all come in tapped, unfortunately. But I don't think we really care. We still had, I guess, now we have 7 mana. But either way, I think this makes just Avenger of Zendikar make more sense. Dump all the plants in, and if they don't have a board wipe, I mean, the game's just over, right? With all the tokens that we have. Otherwise, we could go for something like Doppelgang. Make 2 copies of Sin and copies of something else, try to get some things back. But by the way, I think we're in good shape. Just at where we're at. We have multiple things that can sack to go get lands back or go get more lands from our decks. But like, truthfully, with all the zombies and the elementals, if somebody does wipe the board, we could Doppelgang next turn for 3, 6, 9, 12. So we could Doppelgang for 4, just make a ton of lands and just get all of our value back with the Zendikar's Royal. I think we're just in a really good spot here with all the value that we have. You could even put a Balos in and go for 2, right, and just get 4 lands and get a bunch of beasts. There's so many ways with the Landfall here we can really take advantage, and this was just one of those ones where we just got to print value. And then next turn, the Titan's just gonna either make Sin huge or something else huge just for big value onto our opponents. But let's do one more playtest. Looking at a 4-lander here with Spark Double, 6, and Taval. So we're not at 7 yet for Sin, but we've got some creatures, right, 6 and Taval, that are both going to be able to hold up some value, start digging into our yard, right, getting things ready for Sin when Sin comes out. And I think that is a pretty good place to start. We've got a couple green sources that will come and untap later. So I think it's just Command Tower and then the Swamp. And I think we'll just go ahead and Rampant Growth. It doesn't really make sense for us not to, especially since we can start getting up to Sin quicker, right? 4, 5, 6. So we're pretty darn close. There's Riveteer's Outlook that would be 7, but I think I kind of want to get Taval in here. Start this, getting things back out of our graveyard. Thinking Zagoth here to be at 5 mana, and then it's either save the Spark Double for Sin or make a copy of Taval, since when Sin comes in, we're going to be getting things out of our graveyard, hopefully, and really taking advantage of that. Remember, Taval's attacking this turn, so we're probably going to end up milling a couple cards. I think I kind of like just putting Spark Double in as a copy of Taval. Taval attacks and is going to mill. And so now we have a couple permanents in our graveyard. We get to get a land back from our graveyard back to the battlefield. That makes us a couple, right, zombie druids because of both our 2 Tavals. So turn 6, we're 1 mana away from Sin, and I think we're just again going to prepare to get ready. We'll play the 6. I guess we could have cracked either of these if we wanted to play them and cracked them to get the 6 mana, but no, we're at 7, aren't we? Sorry, we're at 7 because of your Taval's ability. So I think we just slam Sin, right? Our graveyard only has 1 permanent, so it's going to be the Swamp, right? So it leaves our graveyard, so we're going to get 2 more zombies, right? And now, right, on a future turn when it attacks, hopefully these Tavals, as they attack this turn, are going to load up. So the first Taval is going to go off, not going to get anything back for us. The second one's going to go off, getting us that island back. That's going to make a couple more zombie druids. So you can start to see where Taval is going to start really banging up this value, right? And then as we come back to our next turn, well, there's AOZ is probably a crazy play here. But if we look at our graveyard, we have 1, 2, 3 permanents. All 3 of them are creatures, and all 3 of them are great, right? So we don't even mind, playing AOZ. You could do the double overlook to put 2 counters on all your plants. If you're the overlook in, and then it sacks and brings another land in, right? So 2 counters total on all of our plants. We could just put something like Sin and then prepare to cast something from our graveyard, depending on or 6, and prepare to cast something by pitching a land, right? With 6, depending on what we mill with Taval and what we get back from Sin, right? There's so many options from this point on what we can get back from our graveyard. I'll be honest, when I was brewing this deck, I was very intrigued to see what I thought about it versus Taval. Because I think Taval is one of those Taval is one of those commanders that I think a lot of people are looking at right now for this self-mill archetype. I think I still lean towards Taval. I kind of like the value that can be had from it, but I think Sin's definitely a card I'm going to be thinking about for that deck, and I think this is even a deck I could think about as well. I just love the idea of this, getting things back from your graveyard, paying off your graveyard, and I think brewing this deck also taught me a couple things about my Taval deck as well, which I think is pretty cool, and I think that's what we want to see as players. So let me know what you think of Sin down in the comment section below, and I will catch you on the next one.